Alright mates, how's it going? In today's video, episode 21 of Beyond the Dark Portal by Aaron Rosenberg and Christie Golden. Another extremely large mental chapter, and then they go back to being a much more reasonable length, which makes me a happy Buttress. Let's go! Don't worry, we're on the right track. Khadgar felt compelled to say that to the rest of the group as they sat there, in awkward silence. They looked like they needed some reassurance. They'd travelled north from Hellfire Citadel, and whereas Daneth and his group had been fortunate enough to get a nice change of scenery in the last few chapters, with forests and tunnels and stuff, Khadgar, Turalyon and Alleria were still very much stuck with cracked earth, dusty soil and a red sky. The only difference here really was a mountain range, and a spiky one at that. The skull's not far now. Are you certain? Yeah, trust me. I can sense its presence without even searching for it now. It's close. Good. I've had enough of this place. I think we... However, Alleria then raised a commanding hand for silence. Listen. Khadgar strained his ears, but they weren't as sharp as an elf's. All he could hear was wind. But then he heard something other than wind. Flapping. Dragon! Khadgar desperately tried to duck for cover, but before he could even move, angry roars filled the air, and a bunch of small dark forms appeared above. They don't look fully grown, we can take them. Khadgar studied the creatures and realised Turalyon was right. What was it Krasis had once called the younger ones? Drakes! They're called drakes. Not as strong as their parents, but still dangerous. Turalyon nodded, but now wasn't really the time for a natural history lesson. Archers! Fire at will! Alleria and others all started to loose their arrows, striking a number of the little bastards and knocking them out of the air, which in turn heartened the soldiers, who were now just kind of waving their swords about and hoping for the best. But despite that absolutely fantastic strategy, the drakes just kept coming, right up until an extremely loud roar stunned everyone rigid and the ground started to shake. The drakes then decided it was probably a good time to cheese it, so they buggered off, and Turalyon turned to see one of the weirdest bloody creatures he'd ever seen. Oh, what in the absolute bollocks? Khadgar then glanced in the direction Turalyon was looking, and almost fell on his ass from shock. The creature was monstrous, easily twice the size of an ogre, with skin as rough and thick as rock. It then let out a bunch more roars and guttural sounds, causing more figures to emerge. Ogres. Had this creature just communicated? Only one way to find out. So Khadgar put on the ring I mentioned about 6 chapters ago. The one that lets him understand any language, as well as be understood, and attempted a plan that was so crazy it just might work. Wait! To everyone's surprise, the behemoth actually paused. We meant no offence. Whatever you're telling him isn't working, Khadgar. And damn it, those drakes are circling back. Turalyon was right. The drakes did indeed now seem to be coming back for some reason. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The ogres and their master all sprang into action, hurling rocks and engaging the drakes in combat, meaning they were no longer focused on the Alliance forces. However, Khadgar sensed an opportunity here. Attack the drakes! Alleria stared at the old wizard in disbelief, but Turalyon grinned and nodded. He got it. So the Alliance members joined the fight, focusing solely on the flying reptilian creatures. Until finally, every last drake had been smashed, stabbed and or eaten and stuff.
You not run, but could have. You stay and fight. Helped us.
We're not your enemies. We only wish... But before Khadgar could continue to negotiate the truce, the bloody ground started to shake yet again. And for a moment, he could swear that this giant beast towering over him, the one that had just a few moments ago swallowed a drake whole, looked frightened, which didn't exactly fill Khadgar with confidence. A second monstrous beast then strode from the mountains, this one even larger.
Who are you? Why you still live?
We're only passing through. We aren't your enemies. Just let us go and we'll...
No. You leave, you speak. Speak of Gron. Speak of Gruul. Horde come. No. Best you die. Secret stay safe. Gron stay safe.
Khadgar glanced at the first creature he'd been conversing with, but that guy wasn't going to help. Looked like an infant that had just been caught taking a shit in the cookie jar. This second creature was its parent. That much was clear. We will keep your secret. We helped the Gron. With the dragons. This one can tell you so himself. That caused the giant that was presumably called Gruul to scowl. But it then glanced around and actually noticed the piles of black drake corpses all over the place.
You dragon killers?
Yes.
Kill baby dragons maybe. We do that. Not need help. No. You die.
Wait. What do you need help with?
You too weak. You cannot help.
Maybe we can. Ask. Gruul went silent for a moment,
Blackwing Greatfather.
Took Khadgar a second to figure out what that meant, but then his eyes widened.
Deathwing. You want us to kill Deathwing?
Now hold on a minute. Deathwing? Here? And they want us to kill him? Khadgar was as shocked as they were. They'd known the Black Dragons were allied with the Horde, seen a number of them at Hellfire Citadel, but he'd really hoped that it was just lesser members of the Dragonflight here on this other world, not the bloody patriarch of the whole thing. However, what bloody choice did they have?
Yes, of course. Do not worry, we can handle Deathwing. He won't be a problem for us.
Khadgar did his best to ignore the death stares his friends were currently sending his way.
Foolish, but brave. Gruul-like. Now prove it.
Gruul then gestured towards a particular peak, off in the near distance.
Deathwing. Kill. Help Gron rid Mountain of pests. Then you pass. But tell no one.
Agreed.
Gruul then walked off towards Deathwing's peak. Didn't follow a mountain path, just created a new one with his fists. And the smaller Gron and ogres all followed as well.
What are you doing? We're supposed to be looking for the skull, not going up against Deathwing. Do you have any idea what that dragon is capable of? Yes, actually. He's got the skull. What? The skull is right in front of us, and so is Deathwing. We'd have had to have confronted him regardless, most likely. Wonderful. You know, I'm starting to wish I'd gone south with Daneth and Kurdrin.
Not long later, the Alliance forces Gruul and his mates had made it to the edge of a valley that led to Deathwing's peak, and the Alliance folks were all a little bit shocked by what they saw within said valley. Eggs. A shitload of them. Pulsing and glowing.
Well, I guess that answers that question. What? Those carts I saw. The ones being transported to Draenor. Protected by black dragons. Now we know what was in them. And if they hatch, the black dragons will overrun this entire world. Then we best make sure they don't hatch.
Alleria raised her bow, but Khadgar stopped her.
You might want to make those your first targets.
Khadgar pointed above, and Alleria cursed as she saw the dark shapes flying towards them. And so, without further ado, the battle was on. Gruul went ahead and slapped a whole bunch of dragons out of the sky. Alleria and other archers fired their arrows. Khadgar used his magic, as did some of the ogres, which was a bit weird. Any drakes that were grounded were picked up by soldiers and Turalyon and other ogres. At one point, Turalyon watched in horror as ogres started ripping the wings off drakes in the same way a sociopathic child would torture a butterfly. You know, I'm not sure we're fighting the right enemy. Their tactics may be brutal, but it's working. Once the fighting was over, it was time to move on to the eggs. However, again, Turalyon seemed hesitant.
What's the matter? Dragons are sentient creatures. They think. They feel. It's one thing to fight the drakes, but these are babies. Turalyon, I love that compassionate heart of yours, but you know what will happen if they're not killed now.
Turalyon grimaced. 'Twas a tough one. A difficult decision. What to do? What to do? Destroy the eggs! So the Alliance forces went ahead and killed a whole bunch of babies. And just as Turalyon himself was smashing the last egg, a loud shriek filled the air. Khadgar glanced up to see a huge shadow launch itself from the peak, its wings covering the entire valley in darkness. Pull back! To the valley wall! Khadgar and Alleria followed Turalyon's orders to cheese it to cover, and once there, Khadgar studied this gargantuan foe. 'Twas definitely Deathwing, and he really was massive. Inconceivably huge. But there was one thing that struck Khadgar as curious. Plates of silvery glinting metal running down the beast's spine, and beneath those plates were glowing lines of red lava. What was all that about? Oh, and there was something else interesting about Deathwing. He was holding something in his left foreclaw.
He has the skull with him. Nice of him to bring it to us. But how the hell do we get it?
Come forward, disgusting cowardly wretches. Murderers of defenseless infants. No torment and madness before I devour you whole. Who will be the first to be burned to ashes?
Deathwing then narrowed his eyes and focused with dreadful intent upon Gruul.
You.
I am Gruul, greatest of Gron. This is my land, my mountains. You will not take them. You go, or end up like children.
Deathwing then roared in fury.
My children. Perfection incarnate. Beautiful and defenseless.
Deathwing's words then turned unintelligible as he howled and flailed in anger and grief. Guy was understandably very upset, and Khadgar kinda wished he'd listened to Turalyon's reluctance to kill a bunch of babies.
Oh, how brave of you. Such courage it must have taken to smash shells and murder defenseless infants. A pity you will not live to brag about such a noble feat.
The black aspect then flapped his wings, causing a gust which sent Gruul flying into a wall.
I've had many names throughout history. Neltharion, Zaxxas. I am the Bane of Life, the Lord of Death, and I tell you now that this world is mine.
Never!
Gruul then launched himself at Deathwing and slammed into the beast's chest with such an impact the mountains around them cracked. But Deathwing didn't give a shit.
Is that all you have?
Deathwing sneered and then raised his right foreclaw over the Grun's head, almost as if about to squash an insect. Except that wasn't what he was doing. 'Twas a signal to a bunch more black dragons perched upon the peaks around the valley, and they were now all diving down directly towards the Alliance forces. Sons of Lothar, attack! Another big battle then occurred, which we're just going to gloss over, during which Khadgar had kept one eye on the fight between Gruul and Deathwing. As much as he admired the Grun's courage, he knew Gruul was going to lose. Hell, the only reason he'd lasted this long was because Deathwing was likely toying with him. They needed to get the skull before Deathwing got bored. So Khadgar raised his staff high, muttered some words of power, and struck Deathwing with the biggest bloody lightning bolt he could conjure, hitting the beast square in the chest.
Well struck, little mage. But I mastered such magics millennia before your race first learned of them. You'll have to try much harder than that.
Deathwing then went right back to his fight with Gruul, whilst Khadgar came to the realisation that this was bloody hopeless. That was the strongest spell he knew, and it achieved absolutely jack shit. How the hell were they going to pierce Deathwing's armoured hide? Wait, armoured. The metal plates. That's it. Studying Deathwing again, Khadgar concluded that the Black Dragon was virtually made of lava, and those metal plates were the only thing holding him together. Lightning hadn't worked, fire spells would be useless, the dragon's body likely burned at such a high heat that ice would be useless as well. Khadgar's most powerful magics weren't going to touch the guy. But what if he used one of his weakest? What if he tried to use one of the first spells he'd ever learned at Dalaran? A simple parlour trick. It was worth a try. So Khadgar squared his shoulders and raised his hands.
How entertaining. Have you not realised yet that your mightiest spells cannot harm me?
However, the words within Khadgar's incantation then registered, and the dragon's eyes flew wide with alarm.
Pathetic wretch. I will silence you.
The mage completed his casting, and the metal plates around Deathwing's body began to shift, with several of them starting to fall away completely. The dragon craned his neck to look at the damage, and realised the tables had well and truly turned, and turned back to Khadgar, absolutely furious.
You may have won this battle, but hear this, and hear it well. I have seen you, mage.
Khadgar gulped, a little bit terrified.
I've burned your face into my memory. Rest assured, I will come for you.
And with that, the destroyer unfurled his wings and buggered off, conveniently leaving the skull behind. And also all the other black dragons buggered off too, because what ifs. After the absolute terror and shock wore off, Khadgar walked up and grabbed the skull, only to be ever so slightly surprised when it started speaking.
Human, but powerful. What great potential I sense here. But that is to be expected, is it not? From Medivh's apprentice. You can become stronger yet, if you have the courage to embrace your destiny. I can teach you that blood and slaughter are the keys to true...
Khadgar shoved the skull into a sack.
No thanks. Finally. Your gamble worked, Khadgar, and brilliantly. There's still the matter of Nazul, and the rest of the artifacts. But if the others succeed, then we can finally close the portal for good.